Hi, I'm Kaya.
And I'm Joanna.
And this is Starlit Citadel Reviews.
Spyfall is a bluffing and deduction party game from Alexander Ushan and Hobby World.
In Spyfall, players use clever questions and answers to root out a spy in their midst, while the spy tries to figure out where on Earth they are. It's played in as many 8-minute rounds as players want, by 3 to 8 players.
Players begin Spyfall by sorting the location cards into decks, with a spy card at the top of each one. The decks are placed in separate bags and shuffled, and then the dealer chooses one at random.
They place the decks face down, select a number of cards equal to the number of players from the bottom of the pile, shuffle them, and then deal one to each player. The remaining cards are put away without being turned face up. Players look at their cards, an 8-minute timer is started, and the game begins.
Each location card has an identical image and location name, and a unique status or role in its lower left. Players can choose to take on those roles when answering questions to make the game more interesting, or leave them out for a simpler variant. The spy card provides no location information.
So the dealer starts the timer and then asks another player a question, beginning with their name. That player has to answer the question, but their answer can take any form they want, as long as it's not another question. Then they ask another player a question of their own. You can only ask each question once, so there's no follow-up questions, and you can't ask the person who just asked you a question.
Evil Kaya, didn't you get the note about the dress code?
Oh, yeah, I just didn't have time to go home and change. Hey, Evil Joanna, do you know where I can find something to drink?
You know, I think there's some good stuff in the broom closet. Kaya, what's that noise?
I don't know. You hear it too, huh? It's weird.
During the question and answer period, the non-spy players try to figure out who the spy is by catching the other players in omissions or errors, or following up on suspiciously vague answers. The spy tries to figure out which of the 26 locations are currently in play.
If a player thinks they've identified the spy, they can stop the round and declare their suspect. Everyone but the suspect gets to vote on whether they think that the suspect is the spy. If the vote is unanimously in favor, then the suspect reveals their card. If they were the spy, the other players win. If they were not the spy wins. If the vote isn't unanimous, then the round continues. You can only stop the game this way once per round.
If the spy becomes confident that they've figured out the location, they can stop the game and reveal that they're the spy. Then they take a look at the rulebook and select the location that they think they're in. If they're right, they win. If they're wrong, they lose.
The round will always end after 8 minutes. At that point, the players discuss amongst themselves who they think the spy is, and then everyone gets to vote on it in turn. If the vote is unanimous and the spy is identified correctly, the spy loses. If the spy is not identified or the vote is split, the spy wins.
A game lasts as many rounds as the players choose. After each round, points are given out dependent on whether the spy won or the other players won, or whether the game ended at the end of the 8 minutes or whether the players stopped the game to make their guess. At the end of the chosen number of rounds, the player with the most points is the winner.
So I had a blast playing Spyfall. It's a really unique game, and I've never seen anything quite like it. What's incredibly striking is just how open that question and answer format is. People can ask you anything, and you can say pretty much anything in response, and you can even do it in the role of a character. It's so wide open that when you first start playing, especially if you're in a group of people who've never played it before, it can be overwhelming. You don't really know what to say or where to go because you've just been given so many options and no real direction in how you're supposed to do things. But it really, really rewards creativity, and it lends itself to some very interesting approaches to the game. You can have, the gamer's gamer and logician who is just going to ask questions that are meant to ferret out very specific things. You have the role player who's really going to get into the characterization and the storytelling aspect of things. And both of those kinds of approaches are going to add very different flavors to the game. They're both valid approaches for solving that puzzle that's at the center, and it means that the game is a really unique experience every time you play it, just because the approaches that people are going to take are going to vary dramatically from person to person. I also really appreciate how well balanced this game is. Often in games like this with a hidden traitor mechanic, the odds are very much stacked against the traitor, or they're in a position of so much strength that the odds are against the other side. It's rare to see one where it seems to be an even balance between the two, and I think that's largely been accomplished in Spyfall. Yeah, the spy is on their own, and they're missing some incredibly vital information, but the requirements for the other side to succeed are so high that all the spy really needs to do is just sow a little bit of confusion, and that might be enough for them to skate by, because they only have to survive 8 minutes. It's a very tight game that's got kind of equal levels of tension for both sides, and that makes it just delicious to play. Now, one con that I do see is that the game does feel much weaker with a smaller group. It absolutely shines at about 6 to 8 players. It's perfect then. You've got a large group, so the spy can stay hidden very well. It's easier for misdirection to work its magic. In smaller groups, it can be a little bit easier to zoom in on that one person, and the tension shifts a little bit from what I think is optimal. Another more personal quibble is with the art in the game. For the most part, it's charming. It's got a lot of detail. There's a great sense of humor to it. It's mostly very consistent and really adds a lot to the flavor of the game. There are a couple cards, though, like the beach and the day spa, where the focal point of the card is suddenly the barely clad breasts or butt of a woman that's in the frame. And it's a little bit jarring and maybe a little uncomfortable for certain players. So be aware that that's there. Maybe don't bust this out with your 8-year-old if they're going to ask questions. It does have a little bit of an adult flavor to it, and there is just a smidge of random objectification that I could have done without.
So potentially another weakness to this game, or something you should be aware of when you're playing, is for this game really to be at its strongest for that question and answer period, and for people to get the most out of that interaction, you really need to be very familiar with the location list, or the center of that rulebook with all the locations spread out in it. If you don't know what your options are, if you're the spy, or even if you're not the spy and you want to misdirect, you have no idea what you're doing if you don't know what the locations are. So that could be a weakness here. It could have been fixed, I think, with a reference card given to each player that they could have in front of them, and they'd be able to look at it discreetly without opening the book and showing everybody that maybe they don't know where they are and giving themselves away as the spy. That being said, though, I also really enjoyed this game. I'm also a fan of deduction games, and this one is so unique and so interesting. The tension level is really nice and high, which plays into the theme as well, because you're a spy stuck in an area with a bunch of potential hostiles, and you're trying to figure out, either you're trying to figure out who's the spy in your midst, or you're trying to survive. And I like the fact that 8 minutes, that short gameplay time, that need to be really sure about the spy if you're going to accuse them, all of that stuff really adds to that tension, and I think it brings this game to life, for sure. Also, the fact that this game is so short, and that you can basically add as many rounds as you'd like, so you can tailor it to fit the group and the time frame that you have, make it a really flexible game to be sort of a warm-up game for your gaming night, maybe play it before your entire group has arrived and just get a few rounds in, or you could play it at a convention, say, bring it out at a convention and play just as many rounds as you have time for. That nice flexibility and that short gameplay time and the ease of learning this game make it a great game for that kind of situation. So overall, I think this is a great game. I think that if you like deduction and party games, that you'll be surprised and interested by this game, because honestly, it's so unique in the way the interaction is handled that I don't really think there's any game out there quite like it.
Diamonds are forever.